It's quite a difficult time getting here. We had a windstorm in Vienna and a connection in Frankfurt, so I had to take multiple planes and trains, but worth it being here. But I have homework for you all, if that's okay. I'm missing my goddaughter's birthday, and it'd be wonderful if I could get a video of you all singing happy birthday for her. Her name is Dianka. She turns 12 today. My kids and wife are out there, and that's how we could start this session. Ready to go? Her name is Dianka. Okay. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dianka. Happy birthday to you. She's gonna love that. All right, on to business. Okay, I'm here to talk about Christian education. I'm told I don't have a clicker, so if we could just advance to the first slide. The main hope of a nation lies in the proper education of its youth. And whether that's home education or a good Christian education, that is a fact. And as a lawyer, one thing we learn early on in law school is that every law has a moral character. It just depends on whose morality it is. And the same is true of education. So your kids will be taught moral lessons in school, so you better choose your school wisely. Let's move on to the next one, please. So back in the day, we had Section 28, which said that you weren't allowed to educate about pretend homosexual relationships as being a real, what the language is, to promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretend family relationship. So that was not that long ago. It was repealed in 2003, really not that long ago. If we go to the next slide, so that was what the Department of Education mandated. If we go back one more. Yeah. Okay, we're missing one slide. There's another slide of the Department for Education, which you saw very briefly. So there it is. I took that myself. This was in 2018 in Westminster. There was no Union Jack or any flag of any kind in the Department for Education that time, except this giant rainbow flag. So how do you go from Section 28 to that? If we advance to one more. Nope. Not this one. Yeah, that's the one. If you were to send an email to the Department for Education at this time, this is the message you would get. You'd get the LGBT Stonewall champion, his and her and they and them pronouns, and it's ideological. This was 2018. This was before this stuff became mandatory in England. If we progress one more. And this is the result. This was, I'll talk about this case later. It's a school called Heaver's Farm in Croydon. They proudly displayed this on their webpage of a young girl. She was year 1, so she would have been 5 or 6, proudly saying that her dream, because they were talking about Martin Luther King Jr., was to use the same toilets as boys and girls. And I can't think of any 6-year-old who would say something even close to that without it having been fed to her time and time again by her teachers. If we progress to the next slide. So, and this is the state of education. In England, and I'll talk about Scotland in a little while, we passed this all in 2018. We made it statutory that all schools, whether maintained or independent, primary or secondary, and everything in between, had to teach relationships as a mandatory issue. So there was no right of opt-out, and they had to teach sex education in secondary with a right of opt-out. One of the issues obviously being the blurring of the lines. What is relationships education and why isn't it sex education? Because sure enough, a lot of it appears to be mature enough that it should be part of sex education. And there's no wonder why when you look at the providers of the resources. If we can advance one slide. So this is a book by Gail Pittman, which won a number of awards, the Stonewall Award for Best Children's Book. It also won an award, ironically, for one of the most complained about books in school libraries. So we got Voices Chanting, Doggies Panting. Next, please. Clad in Leather, Perfect Weather. Dancers jumping, music pumping, loving kisses so delicious. Go to the next one, please. This is my daddy's roommate, and the little dumpster fire, I put that in myself. I'm not great with PowerPoint, but I thought that would be an appropriate thing to put in there. Now, this won't be in every school, certainly. You'll find it in some school libraries. I know Towers Hamlet, for example, is a copy of the earlier book. In a primarily Muslim area, so it's an odd combination there. But the schools in England and here in Scotland and across the country have the discretion to teach this to your kids if they want to. And you can't override that as a parent. Let's go on to the next one, please. So this is the Children and Social Welfare Act, which created the statutory relationships in sex education back in 2018, and it wasn't so bad. You don't see the word LGBT there, you don't see gender identity there or anything like that. It's really just about forming healthy relationships. If you advance one more slide. When it eventually made it to the books, they added that you had to teach about the nature of marriage, which included same-sex marriage. So they had to recognize that in England, same-sex marriage is legal, but you didn't have to go beyond that, at least on the statutes. Now, the legislation also said the Department for Education could provide guidance to the schools on how this should be taught, and that's really when things went amok, because then it was, okay, we must teach LGBT education, at least at the secondary level. At some point within primary school, we should be talking about normalizing same-sex relationships. And obviously it was quite controversial, because how do we go from, what we saw before with Margaret Thatcher's Section 28 to this now? Can we advance to one slide, please? And the resources that the guidance was signposting to were groups like these. You see a lot of rainbows on this screen right now. And they were giving stuff away, low cost, free. They were coming to the schools. And so you had several types of schools. One was the ideological head teacher who welcomed this stuff in and really rammed it down the throats of the kids and the parents despite objection. And then we saw protests across the country about this stuff. We saw the DFE actually release a circular letter warning schools and teaching them how to deal with groups of Muslim and Christian and Jewish parents who were objecting to this stuff, about calling the police if they were protesting to disperse them and things like that, where parents were now seen as the enemies. Then we have the other type of school, which is the religiously illiterate head teacher, or the well-meaning head teacher who really doesn't think about these things on a daily basis and doesn't realize this is an ideological Trojan horse, and therefore lets this stuff through the school doors. So those are the two nefarious cases. And then, of course, you have the Christian schools, the genuine, you have two types of Christian schools, to be fair. We've had Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church and their churches have been some of the worst offenders on this stuff, some of the most woke, aggressively ideological and sexualized material we've seen across the country. Christian Legal Center, a lot of our complaints from parents come from Church of England schools. But then you have the good guys, the ones who are really trying to keep their ethos, keep it Christian, keep it biblical. And we find Ofsted or the Independent School Directorate coming into their schools and downgrading them because they're not teaching LGBT in the way that they want it to be taught. It's not integrated into the entire curriculum. And that's a problem. We've had schools even shut down. Schools that have gone from good to unsatisfactory to being shut down. Some of them precisely because of LGBT education. Or that'll be a underpinning thing, and then they'll go out and find other things to add on to it. You have either ideological inspectorates or religiously illiterate inspectorates who make these judgment calls. There's no real objective standard. The standard is we trust our inspectors, that they have integrity and experience, even though they don't think about these issues, or they might think about them in the wrong way, and we just might find ourselves on the wrong side of the law, even though if a different group of inspectors came in, you'd get a good inspection. So it's just not right. And schools don't have a place to go because the only way to challenge that is judicial review. So there's a way of challenging it through Ofsted, but that's only if the procedure wasn't followed, and that's a very low, or it's a very high bar. So, and that really won't change the substance of what was decided. So you got to go to the High Court, and that's going to cost you upwards of $80,000 if you lose. And it's going to be time-consuming, and for some schools, if you're shut down before the school year, then you're done with a judicial review. Even if you win it, your reputation is hurt, and you're out for that year. Obviously in Scotland, you're well aware, you have the Section 56 of the Standards in Scotland's School Act, you have the Curriculum for Excellence, and you have the new guidance on LGBT inclusivity. I thought England was bad until I started looking at what's happening here in Scotland. And it's universal in that the politicians and the people at the ministerial level are so proud of themselves. We're the first country in the world who are introducing these things and poisoning our children's brains, and let's pat ourselves on the back, and never mind that everyone else in the world on social media is laughing at us, and because our friends in the hallways are patting us on the back, and that's all good, and the campaigners are saying what a wonderful job we're doing. Even though the next generation of kids is going to be suffering horribly. Let's move on. So, the United Nations Convention, Neil asked me to specifically talk about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Humpty Dumpty's there, through the looking glass. I love bringing him into my presentations, by the way. I literally was the Vatican presenting on Tuesday, and I brought Humpty Dumpty there as well. It's because when you use a word, you can really make it mean anything you choose it to be. The question is, who's the master? That's all. And that's what this document is, because it's not a horrible document. It's not an awful document. But they've turned it into it because they've got these civil servants in Geneva who are interpreting it and putting words into it that aren't in the text and suggesting it means something it's not. If you think about it, out of all the countries in the world, there's 190. See, I have a degree, and I don't know how many countries. 196, but it serves me right for doing a speech in front of a group of teachers. Okay. But think about how many of them hold on to these Western ideals, these minority views that we hold here in places like Scotland, England, Canada. Not many, and they wouldn't have agreed to the interpretation of this document the way it's being put out. But again, no one cares because the civil servants work behind closed doors, and the Scottish government is happy to take on the meaning that they're putting to it. So I put in red the bad stuff, and green the good stuff. So I think the green bit about the evolving capacities of the child, respecting the manner in which parents want to raise their kids, and we see that in the Education Act, we see that in the European Convention on Human Rights, Protocol 1, Article 2. That is a defining legal standard, that parents are to guide how their children should be educated. And we flip that backwards because of the red bits. The red bits about, we need to listen to our 5-year-old about how they want their sexual education taught to them. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. My 5-year-old can barely spell her first name. She doesn't know about any of this stuff. So when they're talking about this stuff, what they mean is that earlier slide about the girl holding the placard who's already been proselytized to about this stuff. And it's horrifying. We can go on to the next slide. So this is Nick Gibb, who was the Minister for School Standards, who was really instrumental in England in passing this stuff, and he's not to be confused with any of the Bee Gees. Neil was the only one who laughed at that. Huh? Again, this is when it was being formed, and it was just this idea that, this is wonderful, it's landing well, and it wasn't landing well, it still isn't landing well. And we are the first nation in the world to be undertaking this. This is the type of nonsense that's coming out of the mouths of our governments, when at that time in Birmingham there was mass protests taking place over this type of education, and cases that were going to the courts, which we represented a few of those clients. If we could progress to the next one. And this is the effect of the education. I mean, these statistics that I'm going to show you in the next few slides are beyond alarming. So you have the number of 16 to 24-year-olds identifying as bisexual. So look at that, 2014 to 2014 is kind of a random year, but this is when we started talking about statutory relationships education, and when we started having campaigners going out and saying we need more a holistic sexual education. We need to be teaching relationships education. And so there were a lot of schools already teaching RSE before it was RSE. They were just doing it in a way that wasn't wholly legal because they didn't have these statutory safeguards of needing to consult with parents, needing to inform parents of what was being taught. If we go to the next slide. This one breaks my heart. So according to the UK's Office of National Statistics, the percentage of girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 who identify as lesbian rose from 4.8% in 2017, that's the year before RSE became mandatory, to 10.6% in 2022. And we saw a similar rise in the number of young men identifying as gay. So we see a shockingly huge increase in those who identify as bisexual, and an astronomical increase in the kids identifying as LGBT. And that's not a coincidence. It's not because they were always identifying that way. It's because it was the normalization, it became cool, it became something to be celebrated, and you have young kids, 13, 14, 15, who want to fit in, and all of a sudden they're being celebrated, they're being part of something. And that's education. We did that. The government did that. Go on to the next slide, please. So Christy Higgs, this was a big case. It was won at the Court of Appeals. I'll only talk about it briefly because I want to keep to my time. But she was a pastoral assistant in a primary school. And back in 2018, she went to her Facebook with her settings on private. She had her maiden name. She didn't mention her employer, Farmers School. Ironically, everyone knows Farmers School in the legal world now. They didn't back then, and they wouldn't have if they didn't treat her so horribly. But she posted twice. One was a petition saying that we need to go re-debate this and have opt-outs for relationships education. And the second was something about teaching gender identity and LGBT education to primary age kids. And she put her own, she's a mother to young kids, Christian. So she emotively added her own commentary to the posts, which from a believer's perspective, to the people in this room, would be absolutely normal and appropriate. For those who are campaigners or who are the types who clutch their pearls at wokeness, they took offense to it, and someone made an anonymous complaint, and Christy was interviewed for 6 hours, and her views were compared to things like Nazism, and then she was dismissed for gross misconduct. And if you looked at her post, you'd be shocked at how did it happen? She went to the employment tribunal, and the employment tribunal said, yeah, these views are offensive, and they had a right to dismiss her because of reputational damage. The question is, what reputational damage? No one knew where she worked, who she worked with, until it became national news, And it took 6 years for it to get to the Court of Appeal for a unanimous decision for the court to say, my goodness, what has happened to free speech and freedom of religion that this is causing dismissal? And the 3 judges at the Court of Appeal were genuinely taken aback. And it was a strong decision in her favor, which said, look, if you dismiss someone because of the substance of the belief that they're expressing, that is discrimination. There's no defense for that. You are guilty of discrimination. If, on the other hand, it's said in an offensive way, like the manner in which the expression is believed, then there's a bunch of tests that need to be undertaken to determine whether it falls on the right side of the law or not, including remembering the importance of free speech. And they said reputational damage has to be actual. It can't be illusory, it can't be theoretical, it can't be what the school thinks it might be. It has to be real. And they said, look, we're surprised that Christy got suspended, nevertheless dismissed. Like, how did this get this far? And they said, from now on, when we look at these things, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what she intended to say and not how the offended listener took it to mean. So it was a big victory. And it means that all of you can go to your Twitter or X, is it X now? Yeah. or to your other social media platforms and not worry so much about getting in trouble with your employer, thanks to Christy and her 6-year journey. Next slide, please. So, Nick Gibbs, the non-member of the Bee Gees, said how wonderfully this landed. Not really, because not too many years down the line, we had a government review of RSE and sex education because parents across the country were saying, like, my kids are learning about pornography by seeing pornography. My kids are learning about masturbation as part of health class. You know, there was this concept that, okay, we want to teach this stuff that's really mature and it's sex education, but we'll call it relationships education. And then we can force everyone to watch it. And that's what happened. And, you know, we had a case, and I'll talk about it, I think, in the next 2 or 3 minutes, where it went to the courts, and through discovery, we saw the head teacher was sending letters to the other teachers saying, yeah, you know, let's call this relationships education and not sex education, because we don't want the parents to complain, and we don't want to give them a chance of opting out. So, you know, there were head teachers, bad actors, who were purposely using the law, weaponizing it to force kids to be educated this way. Can we progress to the next slide? And, you know, here we are. We see this across the country, here in Scotland as well. School diversity weeks, pride weeks. If we can go to the next slide. So, sorry, as many as half of schools are now having some form of celebration of Pride Month. We have pride parades happening in our schools. We have kids being required to make LGBT-themed art in their art classes. This is happening in more than half the schools. That's fair to say. Church of England schools, maintained schools across the board. It's happening. Can we go to the next slide, please? And in 2018, this was a case that I was heavily involved in, the case of Izzy Montague, and that was precisely what happened. Her 4-year-old son in reception, their school decided that they were going to have a mandatory pride parade around the school. The kids were going to have rainbow art that they were going to have to make. That was mandatory. Rainbows or whatever made them proud to be them. They were going to then march around the school for 20 minutes listening to gay-themed songs, some of them being projected on a screen, rainbow-colored screen. They were going to have an openly gay MP come and address this school. They were told to wear their brightly colored clothes. Teachers were wearing campaign shirts, love is love, rainbows everywhere. And so this was mandatory from ages 4 to the end of primary school. So imagine being a kid in that school, going through that every year. That kid's going to be a campaigner when they come out of that school. And there was, I think, 120 parents, it was a big school, who withdrew their kids illegally because they didn't have approval that day from the parade. And many were punished for it. Izzy's 4-year-old was put in detention for 2 days in a row because they found something that he was being disruptive, so they gave him some heavy-handed detention. And she was barred from the school grounds for complaining, and eventually this went up to the courts. And it was remarkable because, I mean, one of the lessons that they were doing in this school was they had traditionally boys' toys and clothing, and traditionally girls' toys and clothing. And they said, oh, okay, put them on, all good. And I said, let's switch. Let's have the boys take the girls' clothing, the jewelry, and try it on. And, you know, if you feel good wearing this Tommy or Billy, if you feel good wearing these pearls or whatever, then that's okay. This was being taught to 4-year-olds. The 5-year-old class was seeing videos of Swedish kids chanting LGBT themes and doing a parade of their own to normalize, saying this is what kids do. And when this went to the court, we had a very progressive judge. Unfortunately, he's now retired. It was the last judgment he ever did. And he was saying, you know what, the NHS during COVID used rainbows. Rainbows could mean anything you want them to mean. It doesn't mean it's campaigning. And pride could mean anything what we want it to mean. To the school, it means inclusivity and diversity. It doesn't mean anything else. So the fact that we're celebrating inclusivity and equality is wonderful, and the school won. The school won. And that case has gone up to the European Court of Human Rights. Can we progress to the next one, please? Now, one of the harder things that I speak about, and thankfully the tide is turning on this, is the number of kids who identify as transgender now, the gender confusion that's rampant in our schools. And this is another one, like the other statistics I've showed you. If you look at the years, 2009, I chose that year because the Equality Act came in 2010 when we created a protected characteristic for gender reassignment, and that then led to the Department for Education releasing guidance for schools on how to teach about gender reassignment, which then campaigners quickly jumped on, manipulated, and turned it into gender ideology. And so you go from 2009, only 97 kids being referred to gender identity clinics across the UK, to 3,585 in a single year, which led to the CAST review and the shutting down of the Tavistock Clinic, and a pretty seismic shift at the DFE after some lawsuits came from some people who were transitioning back to their birth sex, saying that, look, we got to stop using pronouns, desired transgender pronouns for primary schools. That's done. Our statutory guidance on keeping children safe in education, we got to recognize that this is not a neutral thing. And the thing is, when that was done, that government was on its way out. Labor came in, and it's not being followed through on. And so it's still there. There's nothing that's replaced it. But schools are saying, well, it's not statutory. It's still in the consultation stage, so we're going to do things the old way. And so there are still many, many schools who are continuing to poison our children, who are not telling parents that they're socially transitioning their kids during school hours and using different pronouns, who are usurping the parental mantle. The next one, please. Nigel and Sally Rowe. Check my time. Okay. Still good? On time? Okay. The Nigel and Sally Rowe, this all happened in 2017, 2018. It was a pretty pivotal time. But we've also seen during this time the shift because of these clients in the way people think. So they're from the Isle of Wight. I've never been there. I've heard it's very picturesque and beautiful. And they're two kids, ages 5 and 7, who grew up in this community, went to their Church of England school at the beginning of the school year, and found that 2 of their friends were now, ages 5 and 7 as well, wanting to be identified as girls, which was obviously very confusing to them. And Nigel and Sally sent a complaint letter. I think I wrote that letter back in the day for them, inquiring, like, what's the plan here? Like, when these kids are old enough for changing rooms, and what's the toileting situation? What are we going to be teaching kids about this stuff? The diocese wrote back, and the school wrote back, saying any parent who believes that these boys are not really girls, ages 5 and 7, are transphobic, and we're going to essentially make sure that we educate your kids otherwise, so that they don't grow up with these prejudices. And Nigel and Sally, God bless them, they were, they're not campaigners. I think they are now. They certainly weren't in 2017. Salt of the earth people, just ordinary parents, never had a celebrity style of life or recognition, went on all of the news channels. They were everywhere for about a week or two, getting hammered by the media about they were the bad guys. How dare you interrupt the lives of these 2 little boys who want to be identified as girls? It was ugly. It was ugly. I remember I did a BBC interview, which was wonderful. It was Belfast. And that was the only one where, like, the people calling in on the phone were like, "This is sick. How could you let these children be this way?" And they were totally on board. They got it. And I feel like most people they got it. These are little kids. Let them be little kids. But because of the sacrifice of Nigel and Sally, we can laugh about that in this room now, because it seems that the tide has turned pretty strongly. Not just at the regular grassroots level, but at the government level. People are saying this isn't okay. And we're having these conversations, and it's no longer transphobic to have, you still get some names thrown at you, but they're thrown at you not by regular people, but by campaigners. And it's become normalized that we can fight back. And the tide is turning because of people like Nigel and Sally. And I think they were really instrumental in the government guidance changing on how we deal with gender-confused kids now. If we can go to the next slide, please. So things like this were being taught. The gender unicorn, which is a really colorful and meaningless way to explain gender identity, which makes it like a little candy for kids to eat. So the guidance now says we can't be using these in schools anymore. So that's a victory. If we go to the next one, please. I think the next one is my little princess boy. So his dad tells my princess boy how pretty he looks in a dress. His dad holds his hand and tells him to twirl. My princess boy smiles and hugs his dad. Now this was, the other books I was showing you weren't really being mainstreamed in schools. This book was. And the guidance is now saying, no. We're oversimplifying these things, we're glamorizing them, can't use these things anymore. And schools still are, because again, it's still in the consultation stage. But there's no wonder why we have this shift in kids who are now identifying as trans when this is what they're being fed at a young age. If we go to the next one, please. So the DSM and various other sources. So the DSM is an American publication. And then we've got the Endocrine Society and Gids Tavistock. But the statistics are all pretty similar. That if you let a child naturally pass through puberty, the vast majority of these kids will lose their gender confusion and embrace their biological sex. Because you gotta let the hormones work. You gotta let puberty do its thing. Yet, if we keep on affirming a child, authority figures on a daily basis like teachers, the school community, affirming a child as trans, their brain is gonna be wired to think they're trans and continue to think they're trans, or even worse, they will know they're not trans anymore or not feel that way, but they'll be so terrified of disappointing people that they will continue on in that lifestyle and even go through puberty suppression, cross-sex hormones. So it's terrifying what we've done to our kids. The next slide, please. So I love this quote from the American College of Pediatricians, which conditioning children into believing a lifetime of chemical and surgical impersonation of the opposite sex is normal and healthful is child abuse. Amen. It is child abuse. So let's move on to the next slide. The last thing Neil wanted me to talk about was the Children's Well-Being and Schools Bill, because that's concerned a lot of people, especially home educating people, especially those who are doing kind of the hybrid home education where they're going to have religious education as part of that. And it's a troubling development in England and perhaps Wales. Wales will vote on it independently. But there's three parts of it which are troubling. The first part deals with home education. So this idea that we're going to create a register for anyone who's out of school. And that's one of those 1984 utopian words, out of school, because home education is school. And not only is it school, but statistically it shows that it's better schooling than many other schools. Some of these Christian education platforms, which aren't identified as independent schools, they're amazing. Some of the best places to have your kid educated in the world, those would be caught up in this bill as well. So basically the register is going to have You'd think, okay, you have a kid in school, so we know their name, date of birth, or address, these similar, simple things. But in this register, if you're home educated, you got to have your protected characteristics. You got to say, which parent is teaching, how many hours are they teaching, if they go to Sunday school or any form of other Christian education, or what's the address of these folks, give us the contact details, how many hours are they there. It's incredibly intrusive. It's discriminatorily intrusive because people who have their kids in recognized schools don't have to go through this. So why do homeschooling parents have to do it? Because there's this culture of suspicion of homeschooling parents, but it's unlawful. I'm telling you right now, it's unlawful. And if this gets passed, we'll be taking it to the High Court. Because it's a data rights infringement, it's a privacy infringement, it's an infringement on your rights as a family under the European Convention of Human Rights and the Human Rights Act. Who cares what your kids' protected characteristics are? Let them go to Sunday school and get a moral education that they're not getting anywhere else. And these regulatory hoops, because if you change any of this, let's say, okay, dad is now teaching less because he's got more hours at work. Well, you got to inform the local authority because the register's got to be changed. It's just ridiculous. The next slide, and the next two incidences are similar. This is out of school settings, and this could be, again, a sports club or private Christian education, a language school. If you're an immigrant and you're wanting your kids to learn their native tongue from back where they came from, this would be caught up. And they're saying that, okay, we're concerned about kids not getting a proper education and about safeguarding. So if they go to one of these places, we might regulate them and treat them as an independent school. But we're not going to tell you what the threshold is. So pass the law first, and then we'll make the threshold. So you see the language is literally what they're saying. That's what the language is. Basically, yet to be determined amount of hours and days of the week, but we'll figure that out after we pass the law. Like, have you ever heard such nonsense? It's a complete breach of democracy. Because Parliament won't be determining what hours and what the threshold is. It'll be the Department for Education. And so these MPs aren't voting. These lords are not voting on anything that they actually know about. It's a shot in the dark. And the same is true with the next slide. So the children, these would be other out-of-school settings, essentially which are not independent schools. And they're saying, yeah, we're going to do the same. After we pass the law, we'll tell you how many hours and how many weeks. And so you can imagine, basically, you've got 3 or 4 homeschooling families getting together and educating together. That's all of a sudden an independent school because someone from the DFE said so. And so you got to go through all of the hurdles that every other independent schools. You got to go through the school standards. You got to have your facilities changed to meet all the facility guidance that's out there and the laws. You got to teach RSE because you're now an independent school. You got to have LGBT education because you're now an independent school. It's terrifying. They're gutting home education, and this is another area where, this element is a bit more complicated as far as human rights law, because under the European Convention of Human Rights, there's no right to home educate. But the caveat is when a country creates a right for home education, or any right, even though it's not protected by the convention, all of a sudden you've made it protected by the convention because you've had it there already. So if the laws are lacking in foreseeability, fairness, they're breaching the principles of natural justice, they're unreasonable, they're disproportionate, which this really is, then there is a route to challenge all this stuff. We do have some wonderful people in Westminster, in the House of Commons, especially in the House of Lords, who are fighting this and still trying to amend it and putting safeguards in everywhere. I'm not hopeful. I think the best we can hope for, and God has done this over and over again, is that it peters out, that it just never gets passed. Session ends and they just don't bring it up on the next agenda. That happens all the time. Now this is advanced pretty far, so we might not get there, but God has done greater things. So let's pray for that, for England and Wales. Next slide, please. We're just finishing up here. So how to successfully have your voice heard as parents. And this is important because schools sometimes will treat you like the enemy. And I'm a parent as well. And I've been in the corridors of schools, and I've seen angry parents who take it a bit too far. And first of all, I would encourage you to say that not all teachers are bad. It might look that way. They have a hard job. And sometimes it might be a misunderstanding. So don't jump the gun too quickly and assume that they've got the worst interests of your child in mind. Sometimes the best way to catch flies is with honey. So be kind, be diplomatic, at least in the beginning, and try and sort things out. You'd be shocked at what you can accomplish by doing that. Each school has a complaints policy. So rather than making an informal complaint, if it's serious enough, make a formal complaint, and then the head teacher will have to make a formal response. And if that's not satisfactory, you can go to the governors, who will then have to discuss it, and there'll be kind of an informal hearing where you come in and set your side of things out for them. And then if you're still not satisfied, you can then and only then go to the Department for Education and bring the complaint. So the complaints mechanism is important. Try to get other parents on board. Be present. Know what your kids are learning. Ask what they're being taught. The new guidance is wonderful on this, that schools must show you. So a lot of schools before this were hiding behind copyright laws. Say, our provider is telling we can't show parents what the kids are learning because it's a copyright infringement. The government has now said that doesn't fly. That's a breach of parental rights. They have to show you what the kids are learning. So be present, because so many parents have no idea what their kids are learning and what they're being poisoned with. So just, and try to get on with other parents. And the more parents you have going forward in a complaint or wanting to change something, the better off you'll be. Next slide, please. And parents can be a prayerful influence. Speak up at your school. Home education is increasingly a way to go. And we obviously encourage you to use that right and be bold in using that right before we lose it. We won't lose it. And here's the thing, and this is like with same-sex marriage. We could have won that if churches had spoken up. We could have won that easily if churches had spoken up, and we didn't. And here we are with LGBT education because, in part, of saying, we kept on normalizing it on down the line, and now it's being, it's such a prominent part of the culture. But we can still save education by speaking up. So churches speak up, parents speak up. And if homeschooling isn't an option, there are amazing Christian schools. We've got some represented here. Their ethos is completely in line with the manner that you want to raise your kids as Christians. That kids who are homeschooled, kids who are going to these biblically centered schools are the future. They're what's going to save this country. So use those options because the times are dire. The times are dire. I'm 51 years old. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and when I started doing this 20 years ago, never saw this coming on the radar. Andrea Williams, our CEO, she never saw this coming. None of us did. And we showed up as lawyers, at least, a little late to the game and a little out of breath. And we had lost a lot of ground, which we're trying to claw back now. So we need your help, because campaigning organizations, lawyers, we can't do it without grassroots, so we need you. So, next slide, please. So, there is some encouraging news from our education department that there are more schools growing. There's a lot more grassroots efforts out there. We heard about a wonderful initiative coming our way in the next few years. So be prayerful about that and be open-minded about sending your kids to a Christian school, and not just any Christian school. Know what they're teaching. Speak with them beforehand, because again, like I said, some of the worst offenders are Church of England schools. So make sure you know before you enroll what they're in for. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have resources at christianconcern.com, education resources. We have a dedicated education team led by a former head teacher. We have lawyers like myself who will help you with complaints or, heaven forbid, cases against your school. So christianconcern.com, no, is it christianconcern.com or christianconcern.co.uk? One of the two. You can tell from my accent. I don't come around to the UK as much as I used to now that I have a family and live in Slovakia. But and the last slide, please. And please do sign up for our free weekly newsletter. It is a kind of a compendium of everything we do during the week, and it's got interesting opinion pieces and things. We have a table in the back where you can sign up for that as well. And just the last slide to show my PowerPoint prowess. So thank you for your attention and your patience, and forgive me for going a bit over time. Enjoy your lunch, and God bless.